people in my hometown went around saying I healed them and spoke messages from God, there'd be a little bit of backlash. People would say, I've known that guy all my life. He used to jump off bridges and sing karaoke and swim in flash floods and other weird stuff, but basically he's a normal guy. So that's how people are responding to Jesus in his hometown synagogue at Nazareth. Many of them recognize him as having lived in the same town, so they're put off by his teaching and wisdom. And as a result of their lack of faith, Jesus' ability to heal was restricted. So again, we see the link between opening one's heart to God and receiving the blessings that he offers. Later on, Jesus sends his disciples on what we might call a short-term missions trip. They were to go 2 by 2 through the nearby villages and stay with hospitable people who would provide their basic needs. So the disciples went and proclaimed repentance, a turning from sin. Now word about Jesus is spreading, and it reaches Herod, the client king of Judea. The Herod family was an interesting bunch. So Herod the Great was the dude that tried to kill all the babies in Bethlehem. He married 5 women at different times: Doris, Mariamne, another Mariamne, Malthace, and Cleopatra, not the one you're thinking of. Herod divorced Doris and married Mariamne. She was in the Hasmonean line, which Herod would later perceive as a threat. So Herod had Mariamne and their 2 sons killed, but not before Aristobulus married and had a few children of his own, including Agrippa I, Herod, and Herodias, who comes in later in the story. The second Mariamne bore Herod another son, Herod II, sometimes known as Philip, although there's debate regarding that name. After they got divorced, Herod married Malthace, with whom he had other children, including Archelaus and Herod Antipas. After Herod the Great murdered his second wife and sons, Herodias was left all alone, so her creepy uncle Herod II came and married her. Their daughter Salome would eventually marry her great-uncle Philip the Tetrarch. Now Herod Antipas is our Herod in the story of Mark. He had the hots for his niece/sister-in-law, so he convinced her to divorce her husband/uncle in favor of him. Now Mark gives us a quick flashback into what happened when John the Baptist spoke out against that marriage. Apparently Herod enjoyed John the Baptist's teaching, but was offended that John was speaking out against Herod's marriage. So he was conflicted and had John imprisoned, even though Herodias wanted him dead. So Herod's birthday comes around, and what better gift than to have your stepdaughter/niece dance provocatively in front of you, your wife, and all your friends. All the while, Herod is drinking himself farther into stupidity, and he promises to give Salome whatever she asks for. Being young and naive, she asks her wise mother for advice, and she recommends killing John the Baptist. Poor Herod was trapped because he'd made a promise, and Herod never goes back on his word. He sends an executioner, and John the Baptist is beheaded. Now we turn to the well-known story of the feeding of the 5,000. Now Jesus and his disciples haven't eaten for a while. They're getting tired, and Jesus says, "Come with me to a quiet place by yourselves and get some rest." And Mark says, many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot ahead of them. And Jesus recognizes that there's a need there. They were like sheep without a shepherd. His response was to have compassion. These people needed guidance. And Jesus' priority is to help these people find a shepherd at an inconvenient time. So the disciples come to Jesus and say, "These people are getting hungry. Send them away to buy food." Jesus acknowledges their need for food, but surprises us by saying, "You give them something to eat." Jesus demonstrates a pattern that I believe is normative for carrying out God's will. He sets up an expectation for Christians, his followers, to give generously to those who need and make sure that people have food. So the disciples are able to scrounge up 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Then Jesus demonstrates his provision over his Father's creation. It multiplies. Over 5,000 people eat their fill from these small beginnings. And I could tell you story after story about God doing great things with limited resources in people and communities. So in the next narrative, Jesus' disciples are rowing through a storm at night. When Jesus sees his disciples struggling to row, he walks on the water toward them. Gotta get that roof fixed. Mark says Jesus was about to pass them by. But there were times in the Old Testament when God would reveal himself to people by passing in front of them. God says to Moses, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence." In 1 Kings, God tells Elijah, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." I don't know how to envision this, what physically happened here. Somehow in his passing by, he shows them that he is there and that he is good. So Jesus is trying to communicate this to his disciples, but instead, they thought he was a ghost. But pay attention, it's very common when God is revealing something to us that we project our own fearful reality or expectation onto the situation and completely miss the revelation. In the middle of our storms, God is often saying, "I am here and I am good," but we miss that. So Jesus reveals his identity, climbs into the boat, and the storm calms. The disciples were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. The loaves showed us that God cares about human need and has the ability to provide for his people. They show us that the heart of God is that they would have a shepherd to guide them. But since the disciples had missed the point of the miracle, they didn't understand what Jesus was revealing about himself. And today when we read these narratives, these events in the life of Jesus, it's easy to get distracted by all kinds of arguments and side issues and miss the point that these presentations are trying to communicate about God and about the storms that we find ourselves in. So pay attention to what God is doing in your life. He's on the move.